All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the very first Authors Chat with Cara J. Swanson. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Ya'ate Ola, and to the rest of the world, hello, how are ya? First Chat with Cara J. Swanson. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Ya'ate Ola. All right. And to the rest of the world. Let me turn down my own microphone here. All right. Now I won't have feedback. Okay, so welcome. For the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about some very exciting news and upcoming projects that I have going on with some great artists and some very talented people. First, for those of you who are relatively new to my work, I'd like to just introduce you to my writing. My very first book is called Blood Cult. And I know it's such a great name. This came out in 2007. This is a fiction mixed genre novel. It has elves, dwarves, vampires, a whole bunch of other kind of ridiculous stuff going on there. This is the second edition here that I'm holding up. It has a few illustrations from a very great artist named Warren Muzak, who's up in Canada. So if you have a chance to pick that up, that's on Amazon as well as on my website, carajswanson.com. The sequel to Blood Cult is called Daegu, and I have that right here. Together they are called the Elvestrin Chronicles. It will eventually be a trilogy if I ever finish the third one, as I have a whole bunch of readers bugging me constantly. When are you going to finish the third? Someday, I promise. It's on my plate eventually. So hang in there, we'll get to it. All right, another book that I had that just came out last Halloween in 2015 is a paranormal murder mystery called When Demons Dance. This book features a Native American detective named Olivia, although there's a bunch of interesting things that comes out in a twist at the end as to her heritage and her name. But it is set primarily in Grand Forks, North Dakota, although she does travel as well to the Pacific Northwest, to Washington State, where she teams up with another detective, and they have to figure out what happened with this frozen dead woman that is found. It's set in January in North Dakota, so it's pretty chilly. Right, and then another book that came out in 2014 is called The Long Journey. This is the one that I have won an award for. This is a dystopian novel. It's again, it's a little bit of a mixed genre, although it is a dystopian novel. It is a number of short stories that are set within a larger whole. So when you begin the book, it begins with the narration by Ula, who is a genetically modified wolf. Again, this is set several hundred years in the future. It begins with narration by Ula talking about her partner, who is a human named Khadija. And then they are traveling to find a thief, or someone who's been accused of being a thief. And then when they catch up to him, they start learning that there's a whole bunch of other things going on in their government and in their world that they were kind of in the dark about. And there's some short stories in there that tell more of the larger story. It's gotten pretty good reviews, and I have a lot of people who are asking me if there's going to be a sequel to this one as well. Again, someday there will be. I apologize, I can only do so many projects at one time. But speaking of The Long Journey, those of you who have read it know that in the back of this book there is an extra short story called The Winter Between. Talks about some adventures that Khadija and her team get into in the winter between, literally, between the last chapter of the book and the end of the book. And I've had people ask, well, why didn't you just stick that in there at the end of the book and make it one long flow. The reason for that is because it is actually its own separate story, and I wanted to keep it as such. The other reason for that is because it was written separately and it is actually its own project. The Winter Between can be purchased separately on Kindle. I would have liked to make it free, but they did not allow me to do so, so it's actually 99 cents. Free quite a bit. It's a nice little teaser for the rest of the book. And exciting news of upcoming projects. I'm very glad to announce that the illustrations for The Winter Between are all done. I've been working with an amazing award-winning artist named Jason Takeo. You can see his work at www.jasontakeo.com. That's JASONTAKO.com. He is a great award-winning artist, and he has done 6 illustrations for The Winter Between. And my plan is that by the end of this month, it will be out as its own graphic novel, if you will, although it's more of an illustrated novelette. So you will be able to get that both in paperback as well as on Kindle. So that is very exciting. That's been a project that we've been working on for quite a while now. I'm very excited that the illustrations are done, and now I can do my part, since now for this it's all been on Jason, and now I have to do the work that I have to do of putting it together and getting it out there for my readers. So that should be the end of this month, and that is very exciting. I have a question right up front regarding that I'm going to go ahead and answer. This came in by email earlier. I had one person ask particularly about the illustrations. If you follow me on Tumblr or you look at my website, occasionally I will post a little snippet of one of the illustrations just to kind of show the direction that we're going and give you a little teaser of what's coming. And I had one individual ask particularly about Khadijah and why she's drawn the way that she is. Now, in the book, The Long Journey and The Winter Between, I described Khadijah. I don't describe her by a particular ethnicity because it's a dystopian novel and it's several hundred years in the future, and basically America has fallen and things are very different. I don't specifically call her African American, but I do describe her as being a woman of color. She has dark skin. She has long black braids, very dark brown eyes. So in the illustrations, someone noticed that it's not illustrated as being particularly dark of skin. Now, the reason for that is because these are black and white illustrations. They're going to be published inside of paperback, and if I made them full color, the cost of the book would be so much that no one would purchase it and it would be too much for me to put out. So they are black and white, which allows me to keep the cost much lower. Because of that, I opted to make Khadijah a little lighter, because I was afraid that if she was illustrated as dark as she is, that in this method of being a paperback, she would come across as just being so dark that you couldn't even pick out her features. So that's why she's drawn the way that she is. It's purely so that the book is more affordable. Otherwise, it would be probably a $30, a very slim novel, and I don't expect people to buy something like that. It would be too much for me to buy in order to give to libraries and bookstores. When you read a book, regardless of how the author describes someone, the character is who they are. And I actually don't describe her very much. There's only a few places where she's really described, and it's really just in the beginning of the book. So don't take the illustrations as being counter to how I've described her. It's just an illustration. Okay. Let's go on to When Demons Dance and talk about that a little bit. Another exciting project that we are working on is a audiobook of When Demons Dance. I've been working with a narrator and a voice artist named Dennis, although he goes by Denny Castiglione, and he is a great narrator and a fantastic voice artist. He has an amazing voice, and he's been working on an audiobook version of When Demons Dance. We hope to have that out this summer, although with all projects, things kind of come out when they come out, and we're still working on it. But check up on my Tumblr blog and all my social media sites and my website for updates on that. Denny is working on it. He had a few times that he had to stop working on it due to illness, and he wasn't able to talk the way he needed to. Obviously, as a voice artist, if you get a sore throat or you get sick, that's going to really affect your work. And so he had to step away for a little while. But he is working on it, and that is coming up. So that is also very exciting. That's going to be my first audiobook. And I was very lucky to be able to work with Denny for this. Okay, so again, that is on When Demons Dance. So that is an audiobook coming out probably later this summer. So keep an eye out for that. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at some questions that I've just had come in. I apologize. Give me 1 second to check my email here. Okay. All right. So a question that just came in is, you talked about a sequel for The Long Journey. You talked about the third in the Western Chronicles. What about a sequel for When Demons Dance? Yes, there will be a sequel for When Demons Dance, and this is how you can see I just have too many projects to be able to get everything out at once. One of my mottos is I wish I was capable of working on one thing at a time, but I'm not. Any of you who are writers or artists in any form or fashion, you'll know that when something comes to you, you just have to do what it wants you to do. If you have a song or a book or a piece of art that is insisting to you that you work on it right then you are pretty much the slave to the art, and it directs you rather than the other way around. So yes, there will be a sequel to When Demons Dance as well. I had a few readers say, how could you leave us hanging like that at the end regarding Olivia's mother and what happened with all that? So there will be a sequel. We will find out what happened to Olivia's mother and the rest of her family. So never fear, that is coming down the pipe eventually. Again, just check my website and my social media for news on all of that. All right, I'll give y'all a second to send your questions in. In the meantime, there's quite a bit about self-publishing that I've been asked to talk about. I've been a self-publisher since 2007. A lot of people still don't really know or understand what it means to be a self-publisher, so that's quite a bit of what I wanted to talk to you about today. A lot of people say to me, gosh, you know, I'd really like to be a writer. I just don't know how to get started. Or I've always wanted to write a novel. Well, first of all, to be a self-publisher, obviously you have to be a writer. You have to have something to publish. To be a writer is just like being anything else. If you want to say, I'm a runner, you have to go out and run. If you want to say, I'm a carpenter, well, you have to build things. So it's the same with being a writer. To be a writer, you have to write. It takes practice. It takes hard work, just like anything else. But if you don't know how to get started, that's probably because the project seems very overwhelming. If you have an idea for a story, sit down and write down that idea. What is that piece that has come to you that's making you interested? And, oh, I have an idea for a novel. Write down the idea and go from there. Then you can start fleshing it out. A lot of times people think that in order to write a story or a book, they have to start at the beginning and write it all the way through. And so they're frustrated right off the bat because they don't know how it should start, or they're not exactly sure what's supposed to happen. And so they kind of just keep waiting until another great idea comes upon them, and maybe it never does. So don't look at it as a linear project where you have to start at the beginning and you're not allowed to do anything differently. It's your book, it's your story, you're the writer. If you want to start in the beginning, start in the beginning. If the idea that you had is for the middle of the book, we'll start in the middle and go from there. There's no law saying that it has to be written in a linear fashion. As a matter of fact, Most of my projects have never been written in a linear fashion. As an example, this book, Daegu, which is my second one, and it's also the sequel to Blood Cult, this was the first novel that I ever started writing. When I got about 2 chapters in, blazing idea, and I had to step away and start working on that. That idea ended up being Blood Cult. So from going from this project, which ended up being the sequel, I had the idea for this that ended up being the first one. And I didn't plan it that way. I didn't know that was going to happen. It was just the way that the ideas came to me. And so then after finally finishing Blood Cult, then I stepped back to Daegu, and I understood much better where I was going with this book, because now it had an entire predecessor that I was able to work from. So you see, it doesn't have to be a linear project. And When Demons Dance is another example. I wrote about 85% of this book back in fall of 2011. And then I had to stop because I couldn't find the ending. I was completely stuck. Stepped away from it. I put it aside. I tried a couple of times to kind of force an ending, but I knew that I was forcing it just because I wanted to be done with it, and you can't approach it that way. So I stepped away and I said, you know what, eventually it'll come to me and I'll go back and I'll finish it. And that's exactly what happened. Several years later, I don't even remember what I was working on. I was probably working on The Long Journey. All of a sudden, I realized why I hadn't been able to finish When Demons Dance. It was because I had been trying to build up to an ending that was the wrong ending. And so really I was trying to force it. Rather than letting the characters tell me where they were going and letting the plot speak for itself, I had a preconceived notion of what it was going to be, and it wasn't working, and that's why I couldn't write it. So then literally in a blinding flash, I realized what I had to fix. I went back and I fixed it, and I was able to finish the novel in probably a couple of weeks. Once I had finished, or once I had fixed the things earlier in the book that were causing me those problems. So you see, it doesn't have to be a linear fashion. You don't have to sit down and do an entire project at one time. And most people don't have the time to do that anyways. There are some things out there called like write a novel in a month, you know, challenging people to kind of do this whole novel in one fell swoop. And that's great if you can do that, and that works really well for some people. That's never worked well for me, and you have to figure out what works well for yourself. Okay, so enough about writing. Let's talk about self-publishing. Only written something, yay! Now you have something to publish. What do you do from there? There are a lot of methods by which you can self-publish. And like most other things in life, it comes down to how much time do you want to put into it versus how much money are you willing to spend on it. You can hire people to do everything for you if that's what you want to do, or you can do it all yourself if you already know how or you're willing to take the time to learn. Or you can do a mix of both, which when I got started is what I did. My first 2 books, the cover art was done by a graphic designer. I hadn't really learned how to do that kind of thing yet, and I didn't want to take the time to learn it. And back then I was willing to spend the money to get a graphic designer. I did everything myself. I did the book layout, I did all the internal formatting, which I still do. Now I've progressed to the point, and there are enough tools out there where I am able to do the graphic design myself. So I don't have to spend as much money. But it took time to be able to get to that point. So my point being that you have to decide for yourself, your time or your money, and then just balance it out. There are a lot of companies out there that will self-publish for you, meaning you give them your manuscript, here you go, you put it together and figure it out, here's my money, you make it happen. And that's totally fine if that's the way you want to go with it. Some of these companies can be quite pricey. I've seen upwards of $1,000 and more. Just my personal opinion, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily always worth that much money. So do your research, decide what is the end product that you're trying to do, and go from there. Also remember that book is not the final step if you're trying to make money from it. If you're just wanting to have a book to say, hey, I made a book, this is my book, I'm done, that's great. If you're hoping to make money from it, to market it, to get it out into the hands of the consumer, it is not the end. So keep that in mind when you're deciding how much time and how much money you want to spend on self-publishing, because knowing that there's more afterwards may very well change your decision. If you're planning to market your book yourself, that again takes time and money. So add that to the equation. Maybe you decide, I want to publish now, and then next year I'll worry about the marketing and getting it out into the hands of the consumer and all of that. That's totally fine. Again, it's your project. You get to do it however you want to do it. Some companies will tell you that they'll do it all for you, not just the self-publishing, but also the marketing and getting it out there. I haven't heard a lot of good things about people who've tried to do that. I won't name any companies specifically because, you know, it's not really my place to say whether they're good or bad companies, but I have heard a lot of people say, oh, I gave this particular company a lot of money. They promised me great returns. I sold 5 books, I sold 20 books, and I never really got anything for it. Well, those reviews are probably out there if you do your research on those companies. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a question on text here. Okay, I will address this question in just a second here. This is another self-publishing question. So again, my point is that it all comes down to time and money. There's plenty of freelance people out there who are more than happy to help you with individual pieces of your project. There's graphic designers, there's editors, there's proofreaders, there's book designers, which means doing the layout and putting it all into a package. So there's lots of places to go out there. A favorite place of mine is guru.com, Guru.com, which I used to be on myself as a freelancer back when I did editing and proofreading, ghostwriting, things like that. And that's where I found Jason, who again did the art for The Winter Between. That's also where I found Selma, which is another project I wanted to talk about real quick. I've got about 8 minutes. I'm working with an amazing artist named Selma Ortiz, who I believe she's over in California. She has been doing all of the art for a graphic novel of my zombie story, which is called Dear Mr. Nowhere. It's an unusual zombie story. Not that the zombies themselves are unusual, but the protagonist and the main characters are probably not what you would expect in a zombie story. So I'll leave it at that. I've talked all kinds of stuff about this project and my Tumblr and my website, and since I'm getting short on time, I'll leave it at that, but I did want to put in a little plug there for Selma. If you're interested in Selma's art, she can be found on Tumblr. And I'll actually put a link from my website when I get done with this broadcast here. I'll jump on my website and update it and put a little link both for her, for Denny Castiglione, who's the voice artist, and also for Jason, who's doing the art for The Winter Between. So you can see all of these. Sorry, there's that question again. You can see these people and what they have to offer, and if you're interested in, you know, hiring them for their art, for their services, then they are out there, and they are great. Okay, let me real quick address this question that keeps whistling to me from my phone. So it came in at the perfect time. This is a question about editing and proofreading as a writer and as a self-publisher. So the question is, do you, odd grammar here, do you proofread and edit your own work, or do you hire someone else to do that? Okay, so I learned the hard way from my first book that you should always, always have someone else. If you don't have the money to pay an editor, which can be pricey, especially depending on the size of your project, then find somebody who's willing to just look it over and not necessarily take the time to mark it up, but just read it and tell you what they think. Maybe it's a friend or a family member or a coworker who's willing to help you out. The really time-consuming part of editing is, of course, doing the marking on the manuscript, whether you do it by hand or digitally on the computer. Just reading it doesn't really take that long. So if somebody reads your book and they tell you, you know, this was a good story, but you had an awful lot of typos, your grammar wasn't that great, you kind of write the way you talk and it came across as difficult to read, then you can take that into consideration and try to find somebody who can help you fix that. But yes, I absolutely always have somebody else look at my work. Nobody is as hard on your work as you, and that's actually not true, because by the time you finish a project, odds are you've read it so many times that you cannot see those mistakes anymore. Just like they showed you in English class, they'd put a paragraph up on the board or projector, whatever decade you were in school. Mine was a few decades ago. And they'd say, okay, what are the errors in this paragraph? And you'd read it and you wouldn't find any, and then the instructor would point out the fact that the first sentence had an A on the, or and on the end, and then there was another and at the beginning of the next sentence. And you didn't see that because you were reading it for content, and your brain just automatically threw out that extra and because it knew it wasn't needed. Yes, you got to find a proofreader and an editor. That can be the same person. It can be two different people, depending on your project and what you have the funds for. And I apologize if you hear that noise. My cat is trying to get into the cupboard at the moment. All right, so that is all the questions that have come in so far. Let me check the chat real quick here to make sure I'm not missing anything. Great, okay. All right, so we're a couple minutes early, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you again, everybody, so much. Sorry, there's the cupboard again. Thank you again, everybody, so much for joining me. I'm going to do this again 2 weeks from today, Sunday, January 19th, but it will be at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So for those of you who are busy on your Sunday mornings, it'll be a nighttime one, so you'll be able to join me then. Send me your questions, send me your comments. I'd love to know what you think. And until then, have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see all of you later.